If you could drink from the fountain of youth, would you?
No, I don't think so.
Yes, I think I would. And I think that anyone in their right mind would say that they would drink from the fountain of youth because they like to linger and hold on to life as long as they can. And if anyone said anything differently, they nuts.
If you could drink from the fountain of youth, would you?
No.
I did in St. Augustine. It tasted lousy, the water.
The term biological clock is a metaphor for the body's many mechanisms of timing. And it's easy to credit those mechanisms for 25 extra years of life, but the fact is the biological clock has not changed in this century. It's set where it was in 1900 and close to where it was several 100,000 years ago. Then and now, we're timed genetically to have a maximum lifespan of between 100 and 120 years. This program is about the final season of the biological clock, about the experience of growing old physically. Scientists are just beginning to understand how the clock contributes to length of life, and they're wondering whether it can be opened up and set beyond 120. The first step is simply to isolate the clock, to discover what it doesn't do as well as what it does. And that's where our story begins.
The things that most men my age are doing, as far as taking medicine, taking lactic for their system, for their bowels and their internal system and everything. I never had to take those medicines. I never had to take anything for. One thing I have been doing for the last month, I've been having some back pains, and Dr. D said it was arthritis.
Well, I have a knee that doesn't work quite as well as it used to. It bothers me going up and down stairs.
It's been kind of a downhill thing for me. My immune system went haywire, and I got a lot of infections, and I took a lot of medication, and that didn't agree with me, and I wound up in hematology trying to find out what was the matter with my blood cells, and my blood pressure went up to the sky, and I could go on.
Things that have happened to me, severe degenerative neck arthritis, probably is related to old age, I suppose.
These are people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, and what they're describing sounds like the inevitable result of aging. But biologists today are telling us to listen closer. What we're hearing may not be aging, but disease. Think of it this way. Suppose you put your watch underwater. If it lost time, would you say the problem was the watch or the water? Do the physical changes of late adulthood come from the biological clock or from some external source, the watch or the water? We know the water contains disease. In fact, keeping disease out of the biological clock has had much to do with today's 25 extra years of life. Control of disease has also produced a change in the kind of illness suffered by the elderly.
I haven't had the flu or a cold for at least 2 years. As far as staying home sick in bed, I don't remember when the last time was.
Flu I never practically had, and I certainly haven't had it in recent years, since I've been taking flu shots at least. I hardly get colds, stuff like that.
Older people today suffer from fewer acute illnesses than in the past. Acute disease, like the flu or a cold, is short-term. It's different from chronic or long-term conditions, like arthritis or high blood pressure. Today, the gradual elimination of acute disease as a cause of death has allowed chronic disease to express itself. The result is that acute disease is common early in life but diminishes with age. Chronic disease is uncommon early but increases with age. And it's chronic disease that complicates the work of trying to isolate the biological clock. Changes once attributed to normal aging, that is, to the ticking of the clock, may in fact be due to disease. Take sexual response.
At my age, it comes in moves, It comes in moves, and your performance all depends on the time between the first and the last time. In my particular case, I guess the longer I lay off, the better I am,
The interest that I have in that connection is to slightly exaggerate, almost continuous. I have no problems with interest. Downward, the response isn't quite the same as the interest from the neck up.
Right.
As you get older, sexual response slows down. But is the cause aging or chronic disease? Dr. Robert Butler.
Now, we don't understand all those physical processes. Some of them we do, cancer, heart disease. But there are subtle changes in circulation in the nervous physiological network that affects the penis and affects the tumescence of the penis. And the more we learn, recently the use of certain medications, or even the prospect of surgery to recreate the blood supply, so that even matters that might have been written off in the past as part of, quote, aging and the impact of aging on sexuality, we may have to rewrite the books now, recognizing that even those changes are really a function of subtle changes in the supply of blood, which may have been related to atherosclerosis and may eventually be treatable or preventable.
It's not only a disease that affects the biological clock. You can also picture the water as social context. Take sexual response once again. It was once accepted as fact that the level of the male hormone testosterone declines with age. But that so-called fact came from studies that ignored social context. Professor Richard Edelman.
Without exception, those measurements were performed in older men who were institutionalized and segregated from the opposite sex. As those studies have been repeated in recent years, either in community-dwelling men or in institutionalized males who are socialized with females, not only do the hormone levels fail to diminish, but sexual capability is not lost in normal, healthy, and I emphasize healthy, elderly males.
The biological clock is sensitive to social context. Today we know that testosterone levels in men usually rise after sexual activity, and even when men are in the presence of a sexually attractive and possibly available partner. We know that nerve cells in the brain sprout more connections if an animal, young or old, male or female, is placed in a stimulating environment. The social environment makes a difference in the ticking of the clock. So does the presence or absence of disease. When you talk about physical decline, you can't say it's the watch unless you're sure it's not the water. Are there any physical features of growing old that are intrinsic to aging and not the result of disease or social context? Something perhaps affected by the water but caused by the watch. Here are three leading possibilities. One is that the biological clock on its own slows our reactions down.
Now, maybe my memory is faulty, but it takes me longer to make a connection with something. A lot longer.
Probably think more slowly, if that means anything. But maybe it shows up more in the area of reading and the patience or whatever it is you have to read.
I'm more particular that I want to be sure that I know what it is that I've read. So it'll take more time. I think that's part of it.
And I'm realizing that I'm older. My reflex is not is not as good as it used to be when I was younger. So I have adjusted to that, and it's strictly a age thing.
Why behavior slows down is unclear. We know that physically fit older adults do not slow down as much as the unfit. So disease and social context do play a role. But slowing down is so universal that it must be due in part to the body's own timing. It appears that a second effect of the biological clock is to make us more unique as life goes on. Even at the biological level, 61-year-olds around the world have far less in common than 1-year-olds. Patterns of sleep are a good example of the increase in variation.
I go to bed about 9 and sleep for 2-3 hours. And then I have to get up and go to the bathroom. So then I could be awake for 3 or 4 hours and then maybe have another hour sleep, maybe not anymore.
I find that by choice, I would go to sleep about 12, or go to bed about 12 or 12:30, and sleep straight through. If the alarm didn't go off, I think I probably wouldn't wake up until 9.
Now, I have some problems sleeping. I don't get over 3 or 4 sleep a night.
Well, my pattern of sleep is pretty good when I'm well. I hit that pillow, I'm gone.
The range of behavior gets wider with age. That's true not only of sleep, but of a whole host of physical responses. The biological clock appears to be implicated. The biological clock is also implicated in a third phenomenon, the longer lifespan of women. Professor Diana Woodruff-Pak has an explanation.
Well, I think we women are biologically superior. Men don't like to hear that, and I'm saying that with a little laugh. Well, actually, living longer than men is not always a benefit for women. We have a large proportion of our older women who are widows. In all species in the wild, the female of the species lives longer. So that's one of the reasons we think it's a biological rather than necessarily just a social kind of effect.
A slowing down of behavior, an increase in variation, longer lives for women. While these features of the lifespan are affected by the water, they seem to be caused by the watch. They appear to be intrinsic to the process of aging, to what we've called the biological clock. What have you found that you really cannot do anymore?
Run. And I don't want to.
When did you stop running?
Oh, years ago, I can't remember. I do, I haven't yet this year, but I do snow shoeing, but that's not running.
Were you ever a jogger kind of runner?
No, I've never liked to run, even when I was doing physical education.
Oh, so you're telling me that you can't run anymore. Hooray.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
The questions of aging versus disease and aging versus social context are important theoretically. But whether it's the watch or the water, the body does age and people have to adjust.
I now wear trifocals instead of bifocals.
I have a new eye, which is just wonderful. Cataract. I had a cataract removed, and of course, it's a wonderful miracle thing that has happened when you couldn't see very well, and now you can see very well, which is it's just great.
But glasses and surgery don't correct all vision problems. People still have to compensate. Take the case of driving. When reactions slow down, when vision dims, especially at night, what do you do?
I've been able to drive all over the place, but I try to get off that road when I see that sun going down.
Because I can't drive at night. So, for instance, if I want to go to my children's house for dinner, they've got to come get me, bring me home, unless I can get home before dark.
I don't take chances. I drive a little slower. I drive defensively. I don't drive on the offense. I drive on the defense, you know. You have to stop. When you see a red light, the light's going to change red. You know that your reflection not like it was when you were younger, so you start preparing back.
And I'll generally choose the back roads to drive on rather than expressways because it's prettier, nicer. I don't have to be concerned about traffic. I can enjoy what's going by.
Many people in later life do more than compensate for physical decline. They actually discover new pleasures on the slower back roads, a new appreciation of nature, a new sensuality, even a new language of sexuality. Dr. Robert Butler.
The first language, you might say, of sexuality is that which is very instinctive, youth-oriented, times quite exploratory, even explosive, focused upon performance. But then with time, like so many things in life, there's an accumulation of skill and experience, so that the kind of sexuality that emerges later in life, for example, after the 40s, 50s, 60s, may be oriented more toward nurturance, the relationship, the mutuality, a broader aspect of sensory experience, and not only the experience of intercourse itself.
Sexuality entails a lot more than just the sex act itself. And I think that as I get older, the sex act itself has become less important to me, partly because of my husband's illness. It's very difficult for him to have an erection, and there is no rhyme or reason to when he does. When he does, we both enjoy it very much. And I find that hugging and kissing and other terms of affection are very satisfying too. And I can't say that I would be unhappy if we were able to do it more often, but I don't feel deprived.
You do have a tendency, your body have a tendency to deteriorate. You have a tendency to deteriorate. But I think with the right partner and love and feeling and a feeling there between two people, I think that it still can be performed to the satisfaction of the two people at their advanced age.
Well, I agree. I think the quality of sex as you get older is not so much in how powerful the orgasm or how many orgasms you have, but just touching and being together and loving.
Biologists will tell you that the question of why we die is one of the most complicated that's ever been asked. Is there a master switch? Some gene that prescribes the hour of our death? Not likely. It's beginning to appear, rather, that our bodies are something like our cars. A car's combustion system, cooling system, electrical system, exhaust system, all have a life of their own. And it's the interaction of these systems that determines how well and how long the car will run. Biologists do know that components of our bodies are genetically programmed to die. Professor Richard Edelman.
Baby teeth disappear and are replaced by adult teeth. In the developing hand, if you will, there is tissue between what eventually becomes fingers. The cells that fill up those areas are programmed to die so that the fingers appear. That is genetically determined, programmed death.
Each of the trillions of cells in our bodies has its own genetic timing mechanism. A classic laboratory experiment indicates that the mechanism prescribes an endpoint to life.
A very prominent cell biologist named Leonard Hayflick discovered that when normal human cells are grown under very carefully artificial laboratory conditions, those cells will reproduce a finite number of times and then die. If you take such cells from older and younger individuals, the cells from the younger individuals have a greater capacity to survive under these artificial conditions. If you take such cells from species of differing lifespan, the longer lived the species, the more capable are those cells of surviving under these artificial conditions. Now, some individuals refer to that as programmed death at the cellular level.
Cells from younger individuals divide more times, cells from longer-lived species divide more times. But recently there is even more to support the idea of a genetically based limit to the life of the cell.
It's been possible to isolate genetic material from the cells which have just about died and introduce that material into the younger cells and cause premature death. Now, you can cause premature death with a shotgun also, so this isn't the best possible way to define causes of aging, but the working hypothesis is, in that model cellular system, that there are specific genes which turn off cell division and provoke cell death.
It's only a working hypothesis, but it does appear that at the level of the cell, something is counting. It's also true that at the level of the cell, the counter can be reset.
If you take a normal human cell, which when grown in tissue culture, an artificial laboratory environment, can only divide a finite number of times and then dies, Hayflick model. If you infect that cell with certain kinds of viruses, the that cell will no longer die. It divides infinitely. It appears to have been made immortal. Obviously, that's good for the cell if your definition of good is the ability for that cell to continue its existence. If, however, you are the host in which that cell has now started dividing crazily, it obviously is not so good. So sure, there are mechanisms of changing the clock.
Is what's true of the cell also true of the individual organism, like you or me? Biologists just don't know. And yet, they're acquiring the ability to remove genes from cells, to add genes, and to modify existing genes.
We can now make tobacco plants light up in the dark the same way the firefly lights up. All of which goes to say, although we're at a very rudimentary stage in this technology, that the day will come, if we live long enough, when certain physiological functions that are lost today will not be lost. Certain diseases that affect us today will not affect us. The implications almost are beyond the imagination. As we understand the genetics of our system, as we become sufficiently civilized to control our environment, there is no limit, in my opinion, to the quality or quantity of life that we can anticipate.
Edelman does not rule out the possibility in the distant future of endless life.
There is no rational basis to account for the termination of life. We don't begin to understand how and why it was created, and who knows if we ever will. But since the capability exists for the cells to reproduce themselves, for the components to reproduce themselves, it's inconceivable to me, and this is, again, is conviction, it's not science, that there should be such a thing as a finite lifespan. I believe that we should be able to live with a good quality of life as long as we want. But that's only belief.
Suppose you could live to be 130 or 140.
If I could have good health, I would love it.
If I could live to be 130 and wouldn't deteriorate any more than I am now, yes, I say yes. But if I live to be 100, 130, 140, and would be a shadow of myself, or be a vegetable, I would say no.
And my husband and I have a pact, and we have talked it over with our children. And if either one of us becomes incapacitated and cannot make the decision, we don't want to live on a machine if there is no quality of life.
So you don't sound as though you're afraid to die.
I'm not. Now, maybe if I'm actually faced with it.
I face reality, and unless some miracles happen in the next few years, the deteriorations can become so severe that life wouldn't necessarily be worth all that much. And if you really get sick and you go into a real bad situation where you have all kinds of modern technology keeping you alive, we all have a duty to die, and that goes for any age.
So if someone said you could turn back the clock, you'd say?
No.
No, thank you. Would you want to live, if you could, say to be 130 or 140?
No, thank you. No.
So you like 82 years just about the way they are.
It's been a good life. And I'm happy.
These are the voices of people not afraid to die at a time when new knowledge is pushing back the hour of death. Today, biologists are beginning to separate what comes with aging from what comes with disease. They're learning more about the watch, the water, and why we die. And as they do, we have to ask ourselves what increasing length of life means to ourselves, our families, and our society. What will added years bring in the way of intellectual potential? How will our families be different? How will our society respond to the growing number of old people who are frail? How make use of the far larger number who are vigorous?
It's a wonderful miracle thing that has happened when you couldn't see very well, and now you can see very well, which is it's just great. Don't ever be afraid of it.